Good morning. Wondering where the rest of the crew is, but we're gonna make it do what it do, like in the words of James Brown and Ray Charles. Make it do what it do. So welcome you to the fourth day of the 10th Siege EJ Symposium. Really excited about this fourth day. This fourth day, for those that are in the room and also online virtually, is more of a day where we provide technical assistance and we'll have a lot of workshops. So for those of you who are looking for help as relates to your environmental energy justice issues, if you're in person, would be better for the workshops, but if you're online, these are the types of trainings and opportunities for you really to build your skills, learn about GIS, air quality monitoring, various scorecards and other tools that you can use to address your issues. So, and all the sessions are being recorded, so we do have a resource database that we built as part of the TikTok. So for the sessions that have been recorded, they'll be uploaded. So if you weren't able to attend in person, or there were some, a few technical issues, you'll be able to watch those sessions later. And then hopefully, if you're interested in receiving technical assistance, you'll go to National Wildlife Federation's website, you'll go to the TikTok page, you can complete the intake form, and we can start the process of giving you support. So again, welcome to the 10th Symposium. This is not 10 years in a row, but 10 symposia over a period of 14 years. Just to do the land acknowledgement again, every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them and around the world who contribute to their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people who are the ancestral stewards of this sacred land. It is their historical responsibility to advocate for the four-legged, the winged, those that crawl, and those that swim. They remind us that clean air and pristine waterways are essential to all life. This land acknowledgement is a vocal reminder for each of us as two-legged to ensure our physical environment is in better condition than what we inherited for the health and prosperity of future generations. So when we think about 10 symposia, it's been really exciting to be a part of this and this helping to support the EJ movement in the Mid-Atlantic and beyond. And if you want to tweet about your experiences so far at the symposium, you can go to hashtag Siege EJ Symposium 2024. Now again, this symposium, and you think about our theme, past, present, and future, the first one was December 1st, 2012, and we're going to get into the keynote later, but our first keynote speaker was Vernice Miller-Travis. So it's appropriate to have Vernice as the speaker for our last day of this symposium. We also had support from Mustafa Ali, Leslie Fields, Dr. Delon White Newsom. So the whole idea behind the symposium was to really provide support to communities who are experiencing environmental injustices in DC and Maryland. The original name for this symposium was the Symposium on Environmental Justice and Health Disparities in Maryland and the Washington, D.C. region. But that became a mouthful, so we shortened it to Symposium on Environmental Justice and Health Disparities and shortened it even more to this EJ Symposium. So y'all know about Siege. We're all about doing science that helps to empower people, and that's what an I empowerment, not an E empowerment. So the idea is help you build the power, grow the power that you already have. And we're also really about liberation science. So how do we liberate communities from toxic trauma? How do we liberate communities from environmental slavery, environmental racism, environmental classism? So that's what we do. Siege is a supporting infrastructure. We're not an EJ group. If you remember in the classic framing, remember the presentation we did about selling out, colonizing the EJ movement, we are a secondary group. We are a support organization, okay? But we support those primary groups, those frontline, fence line, authentic EJ groups who have folks who come from the communities who are impacted by the issues. We support them in their work to address those issues. So I want to thank our sponsors again. Just really want to highlight, the last 2 or 3 symposia that we've had, We've had sponsorship from Meta, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. They've been a very important partner as it relates to a lot of our work, including funding our Mid-Atlantic Climate Action Hub. Also, Bezos Earth Fund. For those of you who go into many of the air quality monitoring workshops, particularly work in Cheverly, some of the work in Turner Station, even some of the support of the work we've been doing in New Jersey with SWIA and other parts of the region. Some of that, and also I work with Robin and IPL around faith-based engagement with AME churches, United Church of Christ. That funding has been really helpful for helping us build hyper-local air quality monitoring networks to communities that are experiencing disparities in air pollution. We also have the Skyline Foundation, Charmed as a center that provides scientific and technical assistance to communities that are experiencing environmental health issues in the area, and they do a lot of work on environmental justice. And wanted to give a shout out to the Charm team, including Maddie Arberg and also Dr. Chris Haney. We have the Waverly Street Foundation has provided a lot of support also for the Mid-Atlantic Climate Action Hub in this symposium. Union Concerned Scientists have been a partner providing support over the years. And EV North does a lot of work around getting access, making sure there's access to EVs and charging stations in communities of color. That's Dr. Shelley Francis, and also World Wildlife Fund. So thank all our sponsors. And we also have some of our core partners. We'd like to thank, again, I'm co-director of the Region 3 Tic Tac. The parent organization is National Wildlife Federation. The co-director is Dr. Adrian Hollis, who's not able to be with us at the event, so shout out to Adrian. Also, Environmental Finance Center is one of our core partners. They do a lot of the work in helping communities who need support build capacity to apply for federal funding. So shout out to Director Kadi Modessa and the rest of the EFC team. And of course, all of our Tic Tac Community Hub partners who get a shout out later today in our closing session. And also our HBCU Hub partners who are part of the Tic Tac. And then we also have our Community Hub partners that are part of the Mid-Atlantic Climate Action Hub match. So the work that we do in the symposium is really to support groups, these hub partners that are part of Match, they're part of Tic Tac, and other organizations who are doing frontline work, other organizations who are working, doing grassroots work, other organizations who are in the communities fighting for environmental justice throughout the state of Maryland, the DMV area, the Mid-Atlantic region, and other parts of the country. So I'm going to keep going because I know we're a little bit behind. So in this last day, here's a breakdown of the day. So you have our keynote speaker, Vernice Miller-Travis. We have a lunchtime plenary that really is going to focus on youth. And remember, you've heard multiple speakers, including Reverend Yearwood, talk about the importance of youth, Generation Now and Generation Next in this movement. And then we'll have a closing plenary, which will be a retrospective and a prospective, that's the right way to say that, about Symposium and Siege, and then we'll have a celebration from 6 to 8 p.m. Please attend the celebration because we'll have a DJ, get a chance to cut a rug. For those of you who know what that term cut a rug means, if you were born before 1990, yeah, cut a rug. And also there'll be food, hors d'oeuvres, and for those of you who love crab cakes, it'll be crab cake soup. And we're gonna need folks to be at the celebration to eat that food up, y'all. So please come and celebrate the 10th symposium, 10 years of symposium. Well, actually 10 symposium over 14 years. So that'll be here in the Marriott. So again, this symposium is about honoring past by protecting the future, Sankofa. I tried to dress appropriately today. So we said it's not welcome to Wakanda, but y'all get what I'm saying. We've had a previous symposium where we did do a Wakanda celebration. I think that the 2018 symposium, right? So just a shout out again to that memory. But just again about how we getting back to our roots is the point. So when we get back to our roots, we're gonna have Vernice Miller-Travis help us get back to our roots with a keynote address. So a little bit about Vernice. Before I jump into background, Vernice has been a great mentor to me, great friend. She lives right down the street basically now in this part of the county. And so it's been exciting to see the work that she's done over the years and how she's contributed to the EJ movement, but also contributed to mentoring the next generation of scholars, the next generation of advocates, the next generation of activists. So she's one of the nation's pioneering and most respected thought leaders on environmental justice at the interplay of civil rights and environmental policy. She is executive vice president environmental justice lead at the Metropolitan Group, and is a co-founder of We Act for Environmental Justice. She has vast experience as a civil rights and environmental policy analyst and advocate, working with federal and state agencies, foundations, and nonprofits. She's done work to really one of the landmark studies, toxic waste and race in the U.S. She did that work, United Church of Christ, and she worked in collaboration with Charles Lee, who's sitting to her left. And it's just really exciting to have both Vernice and Charles in the room again. You think about, for me, Mount Rushmore of environmental justice. Charles and Vernice are on that Mount Rushmore, y'all. So I'm not sure who's on another, or like you say, the top 5 NBA players of all time. I'm not sure who the rest in the top 5, but at least I know 2 of the top 5. Y'all can debate the other 3, okay? Because I'm not gonna get in trouble up here. So, but also, she's had key areas of expertise, like I said, in civil rights, and doing a lot of work on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. And she's done a lot of work, again, in community and public engagement. Her bio's long, her bio's vast, but she is a legend, an icon, one of the sages, Vernice, of the EJ movement. So let's welcome Miss Vernice Miller-Travis to the stage, everybody.
So, good morning, all. Good morning. So these are the diehards, the people who are still here on Saturday, okay? Bless your hearts. I want so many things to say, but the first thing is that I really love this conference. I really love this symposium. You know why? Because most years, this is the only time I get to see all of y'all. Right? And just from the moment you walk in until the moment you leave, you're hugging and kissing on a whole bunch of people. And dear God, please let our COVID protocols be working. But so recently, I lost my favorite aunt. She was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer on July 3rd, and she died on August 24th. And she was the person who navigated me through my life. She was 14 and a half years old when I was born, and somehow or other she got assigned Vernice from the moment that I was born. And my aunt poured everything that she had into me. She was a teacher, a New York City school teacher for 30 years at George Washington High School. She helped to really develop a curriculum about teaching students in the language and the way that they learn. So she had all these immigrant students from the Dominican Republic, and so she went to the Dominican Republic to study their culture and how they speak Spanish so that she could talk to them the way that they like to be talked to. And she nurtured a whole bunch of people over those 30 years. But before that, she was, as my mother used to say, our own personal flower child. My aunt was absolutely a hippie, and I remember it well. I remember her hitchhiking to some of the big music festivals at the time. But she taught me to be fearless. She taught me to not be afraid to do things. She took me to hear Malcolm X speak at Mosque No. 7, which was walking distance from where I grew up in Harlem. She took me to the Black Panther headquarters, which was on the corner of where we lived in Queens at the time. She was the mother of my absolute favorite, precious cousin, Aisha. I'm telling you all of that to say that my spirits were really, really, really low, because I lost my guiding star. And then I walked in here, and I saw everybody, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so the place to be, right? These are the people you want to be with, doing the work that we are doing at this moment in time. And so I want to put the love back out to you to say thank you for lifting my spirits, and thank you for hanging in there on Saturday, okay? I should have said I would speak on Friday and let Mustafa do Saturday, but I didn't think to do that at the time. But I also love this conference because for the longest time, our region in particular, Region 3, the Mid-Atlantic region, was consistently overlooked. when it came to environmental justice issues. And I'm not sure why that is, but when you would look at the research, I particularly remember a moment when, Charles, when folks did the 20th anniversary study or 20th anniversary reflection on toxic waste and race. And they gave all this data about how things were getting so much worse in all the other regions. But for Region 3, they didn't have really much to say. Well, we don't see any hazardous waste sites. We don't see this, we don't see that. It's like, it's not because it ain't here. This is where Dow Chemical and DuPont Chemical are housed. This is their home, right? So you know they left some stuff behind. What do you mean you don't see any hazardous waste sites? People didn't see us until Dr. Wilson showed up. And he hates when I say this, but I just gotta say it, right? He took one look at all the resources between Region 2 and Region 3 and said, the whole government is here. All those government people live right here. They live with you. It's not like they live someplace else. They live right here too, in these same communities. You got all these HBCUs, all these other institutions, all these EJ groups. How come y'all don't get together? And as soon as he said that, I'm like, I don't know why we don't get together. And he said, well, why don't we start coming together? Why don't we start strategizing? Why don't we start really deepening that inside-outside strategy, right? Why don't we start looking more deeply at what is the research that's missing? What are the things we need to be doing? How are we raising up this next generation of scholar activists? What are we doing and what impact do we want to have? So, Dr. Wilson, I just want to say to you, I tell him this all the time, and he really hates when I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. You have been a catalyst. And not a lot of people can say that when they show up at a particular place at a particular moment in time, everything changes thereafter. We can pinpoint from the moment you got here at the University of Maryland to looking back, there's the before time and there's the after Jacoby got here time. So I'm liking the after Jacoby got here time. So he gave me the longest freaking list of things he wants me to talk about. I'm gonna try. I don't know that I'm gonna get to everything, but I'm gonna try to get through this list. Huh? Just a few of them he's saying now, okay. So the first thing is looking back, right? So we're in, this year's conference is a Sankofa moment, right? Or a Sankofa experience. Looking back to look forward, right? Looking back and bringing our history forward so that we can continue to chart the path going forward. So let me say, everybody needs a mentor. How many of you have a mentor? How many of you are mentoring other people? Okay, that's the way you build movement. So my mentor is sitting right here, Charles Lee. And when I met him, I was 27, right? I was 27, 1986. And I had been harassing his boss, Ben Chavis, for a number of years since I had brought him to campus to speak to the Black Students Organization at Columbia University in Harlem, New York. Yes, Columbia University is in Harlem. Don't get it twisted. They won't tell you that, but I just did. 116th Street and Broadway is always going to be Harlem, no matter how you slice it. No matter how many white folks move there, it's still going to be Harlem. And I met Ben, and I brought, he was finishing his PhD at Union Theological Seminary, which is right next door to Barnett College and Columbia University. And I invited him to come and speak to the Black Students Organization and kept in contact with him. And every year, for about 3 years, after I graduated, for about 3 years, I kept reaching out to him to say, you need to hire me, because I'm the next greatest thing in the civil rights movement, right? The hubris of the young folk, right? But I was so serious about that. And one day I called him and he said, well, I don't know if you'd be interested, Vernice, but we're getting ready to do this special project on toxic injustice. And maybe you can come in and meet with our research director, Charles Lee. And if the two of you hit it off, maybe Charles will hire you to help us with this report. And thank God Charles and I did hit it off. I don't know what Charles saw in me. I was very brash. I had, let's say, a very healthy ego. I'm just going to put it like that. But thought that I had something that I contribute to this conversation. Now, at the time, I I had never heard the word toxic and injustice in the same sentence, much less linked together. I didn't know what the hell they were doing. I didn't know what they were about to do. I just knew I wanted to work for a civil rights organization. I wanted to work for this civil rights organization, and whatever Charles asked me to do is what I was going to do, right? It turns out that what we were doing was laying the foundation for one of the groundbreaking pieces of research to really open up the field and the conversation about environmental racism and environmental injustice, toxic waste and race in the United States. And I will be forever grateful that Charles saw something in 27-year-old me that could really go on to do the work that I've been able to do, that we've been able to do collectively. And I'm telling you all that to say that invest in young people. Invest in young people. Believe in their gifts. Even if you don't see the gifts at the moment, believe in them, nurture them, right? Push them forward. Open up some doors, right? I remember we'd be in all these conversations. Big civil rights figures would come sometimes to meet at our office in New York when the United Church of Christ was headquartered in Midtown Manhattan. And I'd be sitting against the wall, so happy to be allowed to be in the room with these people, right? But I would always say, how come ain't no women at that table, right? Why are we sitting against the wall? And the thing about the United Church of Christ was you could count the men who worked at the UCC Commission for Racial Justice on one hand, but it was all these women, right? So one day, this extraordinary woman came up to the office. She was a member of the Commission of the United Church of Christ, and her name was Dolly Burwell. And I hope you know who Dolly Burwell is. Dolly Burwell is the mother of the movement in Warren County, North Carolina, which is really the kickoff point for the environmental justice movement. And Dolly was a member of the United Church of Christ at a church in Warren County, North Carolina. But she was on the commission, so she came up for a commission meeting. And she just walked around the office one day, and she stood in the middle of the floor, and she looked around, and she said, "Look at us, the women of the United Church of Christ." And I said, "Look at us. It's mostly women. How could I mean, we were so used to it, right? We were so used to that we were the worker bees. We were the ones that did the work. We were the ones that got the stuff out the door. We were so used to that position that it didn't occur to us that we were also the ones who were galvanizing the work and leading the work. We weren't just window dressing, we were the work, right? And that really, she said something to me that I hadn't realized, that women are driving this movement, right? So no disrespect to the brothers in the room, none whatsoever. Y'all have been critical and pivotal. But you get to this, and we get to that, but we make it happen. So we need to work on gender parity in this work, right? We need to work on gender parity in terms of how we lift up who's driving the work. And that is not to diminish the contributions of anyone. It is just to say that young people brought a lot of the fire, right? And I'm talking about children in Warren County, put their lives on the line and laid their bodies down in front of big construction vehicles to keep them from opening this hazardous waste landfill. Children did that. Teenagers did that. People of every age did that. Grandmothers and grandfathers did that. So when we look back, right, we got to realize that people of every stripe, of every socioeconomic strata, of every educational level, of every racial composition, we all contributed to getting us here at this moment. And I want us to remember that our movement from the very beginning has stood on the shoulders of the civil rights movement, but we brought some new energy and some new fire, right? We melded up with the indigenous people's movements for land rights and sovereignty. We blended that movement right into this new and burgeoning movement for environmental justice. We gathered up the anti-toxics folks. We gathered up the anti-nuclear folks. We gathered up the land back folks, black and indigenous folks, right? Black people been in the land back movement for a really long time. So when we're lifting up some history, let's lift up that history too. But there's a lot to look back on. But I'll just say this about what we've done. We completely and utterly transformed and changed the conversation about what is environment, how does environment and social justice link up? How does environment and racial justice link up? No one had put those conversations together before, except for the United Farm Workers and their battle to remove DDT as a pesticide in commercial and industrial use. But no one else had thought to link up that environment and social justice conversation. We did that. So now that there are all these people who are in the space, Dr. Wilson talks about this a lot, and there are thousands of people who are in the environmental justice space now. Some of them have no idea what the history is. Some of them have no idea how we got here. Some of them have no idea of the dues that were paid, the lives that have been lost. I'm not going to talk about that today because every time I talk about all my people that I've lost, all my good friends, my good colleagues who died before their time, it's hard for me to keep talking, right? But it's been so many lives lost in so many places, so many places. This is not a conversation that's only happening in our heads. It's happening in our hearts. It's happening in our souls. I learned a new word last year in trying to do some more research in this space, and that word is epigenetic. How many people know that word epigenetic, right? A lot of the trauma that we have suffered from environmental threats and from racial threats is still in us epigenetically, even though we may not even have been alive when that happened. I'll give you one example. How many black people, could be other people, but I'm just going to ask black people because this has happened to me. How many black people do not go into forest or forested areas? Raise your hands. Now, I'm going to tell you why that is. Because our grandparents and our great-grandparents told us to stay away from the forest, right? Don't go through them. Don't go near them. Drive around them. If you're driving from point A to point B and there's a forest in between, figure out how to bypass that. You know why? Because the Klan used to gather in the forest. And the Klan were known for kidnapping black people, taking them deep in the forest and hanging them from trees and or dismembering them, burying them, disappearing them. The forests were the place where they went. Now, that didn't happen to me. That wasn't going on when I was alive, but my grandmother told me, so I don't go in the forest, right? Now, occasionally, I do, the U.S. Forest Service is one of our biggest clients at Metropolitan Group where I work, so I do occasionally go into the forest. But I don't go deep, and I ain't going by myself. And I'm not going to be the only black person up in there, I tell you that. Right? That's epigenetic. It wasn't my experience. This was happening before I was born. But my great-grandparents and my grandparents told me this. And so it's still in me. Epigenetic, right? We carry the trauma of the environmental threats and the racial threats and the violence that we've lived through. Is still in us. But what we have done is to transcend that. While it's in us, it is not all that we are about. It does not define who we are. It does not keep us from doing the work that we've come to do. So I want to lay that down as a predicate in terms of looking back. Where are we now? We are in an unprecedented moment of acknowledgement and receptivity to environmental justice and environmental injustice. Now, I say this to Charles all the time. Charles, did you ever think that we would be doing what we're doing, that the federal government would be so wholly committed to addressing these issues? Charles always has the same answer. I thought about it. I didn't. Charles did, right? I would say some major research will come out, and I would say, Charles, did you ever think that, these kinds of reports would be coming out? Charles would say, yeah, I thought about it. I'm still thinking about it, right? But I didn't see the landscape where we are. We Act for Environmental Justice, my baby. 36 years we're going to celebrate in October. But 40 years of organizing, 36 years of being a nonprofit. I for sure didn't think that we would still be doing the work that we're doing 40 years later. I did not. I did not think any of us would still be doing the work that we're doing, and I certainly didn't think that the President of the United States would say environmental justice in his inaugural speech when he was inaugurated. I didn't expect that. I didn't have that card, that bingo card. I didn't have that one, right? I didn't see an all-of-government approach to addressing environmental justice and systemic racial inequity within every federal agency. I didn't see that one coming. But we made that possible. We did the research, we did the organizing, we brought people out to see for themselves, out of their offices, to see what it looks like before you write that permit. Come and see the places and the conditions that are existing before you issue that permit to say it is okay to build yet another source of environmental threat and contamination in people's back, front, and side yards. Come and see our offices. I'm trying to think, I think it was 2007 to roughly 2014, I worked on a project with EPA's Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards, and it was to integrate environmental justice into Clean Air Act rulemaking and permitting. And one of the things we did, so OAQPS is a really important office, not a whole lot of people that write all the rules, that promulgate all the rules for every dimension of the Clean Air Act. Their office is in Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. And when we started doing this work with them, we said, well, let's do something. We did these trainings all over the country. In every EPA region, we had a big training with EJ leaders, state regulators, private sector folks to really talk about what should we be doing differently to integrate environmental justice into Clean Air Act rulemaking and permitting. And we asked, we begged, we cajoled that the rule writers would come with us to these meetings and that we would do these toxic tours. Y'all remember toxic tours? We need to bring them back because people seem to have forgotten what's actually going on the ground. And we would take the rule writers out with us. And so we were doing a training in Detroit. And we had the lead rule writer for one of the clean air rules that was being revised at the time. And we drove through what's the big refinery that's in Detroit? Marathon. And I was sitting in the row on this van right behind the chief rule writer, and she said out loud, "What in the name of Jesus is this?" I said, "That's the Marathon refinery. That's what this is." And so the Marathon refinery has grown so much that there are communities on the southwest side of Detroit that are literally inside the footprint of the refinery. That's how big the refinery is. People live inside the footprint of the refinery. She had never seen anything like that before in her life. Most people haven't. But the folks on the southwest side of Detroit, they live with that every day in and day out. And one of the things that came out of that process with them was that it is now a requirement for every refinery that is getting a permit either to operate, to expand, to do something different, they must have fence line monitoring. That is a requirement in the rules of the Clean Air Act now. Why? Because we brought the rule writer out with us to see what the conditions are on the ground before you write those permits, before you give people the opportunity to really diminish people's lives even more. See what people are living with. See what people are living with. Well, that's happening. That's become standard practice in the federal government. I never thought such a thing would happen. Y'all can't count the money that the federal government is putting on the table right now. We don't have the ability to count that high because it's so much money. I'm a little worried about all the places that the money is landing. Not everyone understands environmental justice who is receiving these grants, but for the most part, the money is going to do some extraordinary things. It's reaching far and deep and wide. As the administrator of EPA likes to say, the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights has given out billions of dollars, multiple billions of dollars to advance environmental justice and invest in EJ communities. There was a time in 2000, I want to say roughly 2000 to 2005, the Office of Environmental Justice at EPA had a small grant program. And when the grant program first started, they were giving out $4 million a year in grant awards. And at the time, shortly after that, I went to work as a program officer at the Ford Foundation, the first program officer for environmental justice. And I was giving out $4 million a year in grants. And the whole of the federal government, the whole EPA, was also giving out $4 million a year in grants. It wasn't a lot of money, right? I thought I was going to be able to change the world with that $4 million. You couldn't tell me nothing. I just knew we were going to be able to address every environmental justice issue out there. Within 6 months, I realized this is such a drop in the bucket. The need is so great, and the amount of grant-making dollars that I was giving out was so small. But one thing that I did do, and I'm happy to see that a lot of foundations have picked up, is I gave general operating support grants. That was the critical thing that I was doing. Y'all know how hard that money is to raise? And why was I doing that? Well, because I was a part of a community-based environmental justice organization. We Act for Environmental Justice. For the first 8 years of our existence, we had a total income of $8,500. Total income, $8,500. Peggy Shepard had a good job. Vernice had a good job. Chuck Sutton, our other co-founder, had a good job. And our good jobs underwrote our organization. I worked at the Center for Constitutional Rights then. This was in the late 80s, the mid to late 80s. And they made every flyer for every event that We Act ever did. Everything I ever gave at every subway station, CCR made the flyers. Now, let's see, did they know they were making the flyers? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But my point is, we did what we had to do the work, right? Foundations could care less about what we were doing or what we were trying to do. We couldn't get in anybody's door. We couldn't get in anybody's door. And so I made sure that when I had the opportunity to make decisions about investing in folks on the ground, that I gave them general operating support because that was the hardest money to raise, and nobody was trying to invest in growing the capacity of our organizations. I was on a call yesterday, or I was in a session yesterday, and I heard someone say, oh, Casey said it on the stage. Casey Wetzel from Chesapeake Bay Trust said it in her remarks in the plenary yesterday afternoon, that they have gotten the federal government to raise the overhead indirect cost rate to 15%. Now, for those of you who do grant making and fundraising, you realize that that is a really big freaking deal, right? So now you can charge the actual operating costs for your organization against federal grants that you get. You used to not be able to do that at all. We're still trying to figure out how we could use federal money to pay for food, for God's sake. Really? How you gonna have a meeting and not feed people? But we do it, and we figure out ways to do it. My point is that even though we've had all these challenges, we're still at a zenith moment in terms of the consciousness of our government at the state level, at the local level, at the federal level, at the tribal level. The consciousness of our government has been raised so high to recognize that these inequities are a violation of human rights, a violation of environmental law, and a violation of civil rights statutes and law. It has taken us 42 years to get here. I don't know about you, but like the vice president, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to another time when we are not recognized, when our suffering is not acknowledged, when investments are not being made, when communities are being bypassed, when the community right next to you is getting water infrastructure and water upgrades, and you still are using an old system to get your water, if you get water at all, right? We have infrastructure investments at a level not seen since before I was born. We might actually not see it again, but while we have it, we got to make sure that it gets to all the parts of our country that have been overlooked for so very long. Now, I've said this many times. You can agree or disagree. Charles and I, and a number of other people in here, and another of other people in the field, spent an inordinate amount of time, and I mean decades, debating about whether or not environmental justice was a real thing, whether or not environmental racism was a real thing, whether or not people were being actively discriminated against in terms of access to clean air, clean water, safe places to live, green space, access to clean water, to swim in and to recreate in, recreational spaces, you name it. And we have debated it. And when I say debate, I mean talked about it, given congressional testimony about it, talked to legislatures about it, done research about it, produced research, peer-reviewed, scientific advisory boards, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. We done everything you can possibly think of to do to prove to people that our suffering is real. But guess what? I'm not doing that no more. I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not engaging in a debate with anybody about whether or not we have been discriminated against. I'm not. And I don't care where they're taking this conversation. I really don't. Because we have produced so much data. That's what I love about the field of environmental justice. We are some prodigiously publishing fools, you hear me? And you young people are putting it out in social media so that people know that this conversation is real and it's happening. So we have academic institutions that are giving out degrees in environmental justice. What you say? What? What? And I love it that our young people are coming out of college, coming out of graduate school with a keen interest and knowledge in environmental justice because it's a part of their curriculums. When I went to college, there was not a single environmental course that you could take, not one. Not one. The closest was astronomy, and that is not exactly an environmental class. Just saying, right? But now, it's a part of almost every curriculum. There are courses, there are books, there are textbooks that students are required to buy. There are things that people have to understand. There are faculty that teach this as a matter of course in order for people to get their degrees. And when they come out of school, they are not trying to go into green groups or state and federal agencies or local governments that are still living in the behind times, not acknowledging these inequities, because the young people are demanding that this be a part of their work. They are changing the federal workforce. 20% of all the employees at the U.S. Forest Service have been there for 3 years or less, right? The workforces are changing, not because people want them to change, but because time moves on. People retire, new people come in, and the new people who are coming in have a completely different lens upon which to look at environmental issues, no matter how they're looking at those issues. As scientists, as analysts, as political scientists, as geographers, and all the creative arts that have really brought these issues to mind. We are living in a new moment, a moment that I did not see coming. Like I said, Charles keeps telling me he saw it, right? Because Charles is a visionary. So I also want to suggest to you that there's some people in your midst who are visionaries, who have a vision for where we're going with this work. Lift them up. Invest in them. But don't make them the ones that have to file the financial reports, I'm just saying, right? We all have gifts, and I've learned that in my course of life and work. I am not the one that should be filing the financial reports. I'm just not. I married a CPA for just that reason, right? He did all of that. But I am the one that tries to give people a sense of this is the moment that we're in. These are the challenges we have to meet. These are the problems we have to solve because people's lives are hanging in the balance. So going forward, what is it that we need to do? We need to be unified, first of all. Sometimes we can get very fractious. And I just want to say this is Vernice's thinking, but since I was there at the beginning, I get to have an opinion about this. Climate justice is not a separate movement. Climate justice is not a separate conversation. Climate justice is a derivative of the broader environmental justice conversation. We made that space for everybody. It's elastic. That's why we made the platform the way we did. I thought she was telling me how much time. I'm just checking. How much more? Okay. So we made this platform elastic for a reason. We made this table so big, and it keeps getting bigger. Everyone is welcome at the environmental justice table, everyone. Whatever you do, we have a seat for you at this table. Whatever you do. If you're an artist, we have a seat for you at this table, because visually, we need to depict to people what is it that we're talking about, what is our current reality, and what is the vision that we have for the future. Most people are visual learners, so you gotta have people who work in the visual depiction and artistic space in your space with you. We have space for the poets, for the people who inspire people to do more than we've ever done before, to bring us all together, right? We have space for the writers and for the diarists who are documenting what it is that we're doing. So I have to tell you that one of the most extraordinary things that I could possibly imagine happened to me 2 years ago. I happen to serve on the advisory board of the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum. How many of you who are from the DMV have been to the ACM? Okay, the next year, I want all of them hands to be up. And maybe we need to have a reception or something at the Anacostia Community Museum to get everybody in our space. But they have created the first ever environmental justice center within the Smithsonian Institution. And that center, though it's housed at the Anacostia Community Museum, is going to serve the entire Smithsonian system. And so they are also building archives. And while I'm talking about this, Charles Lee, I know you got boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff, because I had boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff. And they asked me for my papers. And I had the archivists from the Smithsonian in my house for about a year. And they went through everything. And they took 106 boxes of my belongings out of my house. I wish my husband were still alive, because he always said those boxes were junk and I needed to throw them out. And I told him I couldn't throw them out because that's where my book was. All the source material from my book is there. And he said, you ain't never gonna open those boxes, and so help me. Not until the archivist from the Smithsonian got there. Some of those boxes had not been opened in 25 years. He was right about that. But I knew that the things in them were of value. I couldn't exactly articulate why they were of value, but I know that when you're a part of a social movement, holding on to the things that you produce, the flyers, the booklets, the reports, the studies, all of the things that we produced are of value, right? So I donated my papers to the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum. In a million years, I could never have imagined that this work that I've been doing for most of my adult life would find its way into the Smithsonian Institution. And about 6 months after I gave my papers to the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress called, and they asked, you know, we are looking to create an archive. And I said, well, you just missed it, because the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum has my papers. But I still have some things. I said, no. So I referred them to Charles. I said, Charles could be a library, right? Charles could be a library unto himself, because I know he has a million things that are of critical importance to the work. Hold on to that stuff. Give it to your local libraries. Give it to academic institutions. Give it to bigger organizations that have the ability to house it. But let's tell our story, right? And let's tell our story everywhere that it is. Our story is everywhere. That is the beauty of environmental justice. Everywhere that we are, there is a story, there is a struggle, there is triumph, there is work that has been done. There are fights that are still going on. Look at South Baltimore, right? There are fights that are still going on and that have not been addressed in their entirety yet. But we know we're on the path. And right at this moment, the federal government is standing with us. Now, why is that important? That's important because you can be in a fight for your lives. But if you don't have anybody standing with you that can make people do right, you know, Martin Luther King said, I can't make you love me, but I can sure make you respect the law, right? And that's all we're talking about. So when we have these conversations about Title VI enforcement and civil rights enforcement, it's real simple. Sometimes it can get very complex, right? The conversation can really be flying over everybody's heads because it seems like just us civil rights practitioners are talking to each other. But this is what we mean. To discriminate against people because of who they are and the color of their skin, the language that they speak, the places that they live, is a fundamental violation of the Constitution of these United States and the Civil Rights Act and the Declaration of Human Rights. We said that in the Principles of Environmental Justice in 1991. We are not stepping back from that. That's the fundamental battle that we're in. And until everybody is in agreement with that, we will continue to fight that fight. Now, you may hear some crazy things going on and being said out in the universe these days, the universe known as the United States of America. I'm going to use this very delicate technical term. Some of it is just batshit crazy, okay? Just batshit crazy. But don't fall for the okie doke. Don't step away from the table. If the fight is about what books need to be distributed in your local public school system, be in that fight, because we're in some of those books. Our story is in some of those books, right? If the fight is about whether or not we want to preserve a few seats at a particular university or a particular college or a particular workplace for women, for LGBTQIA folk, for differently able people, be in that fight, because that's our fight too, right? If the fight is about who gets to represent whom and who gets to speak for whom, be in that fight, because that's our fight too. Don't shirk any of the craziness that's going on locally. Don't say, well, that's not environmental, but it's human rights, it's social justice, it's racial justice. That's our work, right? I'm not saying give up on the EJ stuff. I would never, ever, ever say that. But there's a bigger conversation going on right now. And that conversation is about whether or not all of us get to participate in this democracy or not. That is such a fundamentally all-inclusive moment, right? Whether or not I have fundamental rights. If you look back at the Principles of Environmental Justice, you will see that there's a whole principle about reproductive rights. I wrote that. Because I knew then informed consent and reproductive choice was a part of this conversation, right? 1991. Some ways it seems like we haven't moved very far, but in other ways we've moved a mighty long way. But the basic message is, don't get up from the table. Do not get up from the table. If you get sick and you can't get back to the table, make sure somebody is sitting in your seat, either warming it for you or you're giving a seat to somebody else. Do not get up from the table, because what? When you're not at the table, you are on the menu. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of being on somebody's menu, right? I want to set the table. I want to invite who comes. I want to say what the menu is, what we're going to talk about, what we're going to do. And what we need to do is a fundamental fight for justice and equality and human rights. We are still in that conversation. Martin Luther King was in that conversation, right? And so many other people were in that conversation. We are in the same conversation. And in order to prevail, you cannot get up from the table. No matter how tired you are, do not get up from the table. But while you're at the table, have some wine, have some good food, have some good music. As our good brother Damu Smith used to say, there's joy in this work, right? There's joy in the struggle. There's joy in prevailing over the work. We have prevailed and slayed a whole bunch of dragons, but we've been so enmeshed in the fight that sometimes we don't look up and tilt our heads up and say, gee, we have done a lot of great and amazing things that nobody thought we would ever be able to do. And most of it was without no money and no support and no government agency standing with us, right? And we did that. We transformed this conversation. So we're going to go forward and continue to do this work. We are in a zenith moment. And as somebody said yesterday, I think it was Mustafa, about not wanting to jeopardize anyone's 501c3 standing with the IRS. We have work to do. We have work to do between now and November 5th and thereafter. But we have work to do. Do not get up from the table. Carry the flyers. Carry the word. Lift it up in your organizational conversations. Because either we're going to have the opportunity to keep this train moving, or we're going to run into a brick wall. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Let's be serious about this. Thank you so much.
Let's keep giving Vernice some applause for that. Don't get up from that table. As always, Vernice is the closer when it comes to the symposium and all the work in the movement. Said since the 80s and now, and again been a fighter, and also, as I said, supporting those of us who come behind. And this moment is a huge moment. So we're going to transition to our next set of sessions. We have a few announcements for room changes. The federal funding session, 3D, that session was canceled. It's kind of a placeholder session, so it's on me. Sorry about that, y'all. 1E, Climate Justice Fellows 3, has moved from room 2104 to room 2115. Session 2E, Grant Writing Workshop, has moved from room 2104 to room 2115. So that's the second block of concurrent sessions. And 3A, Climate Justice Fellows 4, that's moved from 2104 to room 2112. So again, 1E has moved to 2115, 2E has moved to 2115, and 3A has been moved to 2112. So thank you again, everybody. Y'all go through your first block of current sessions. Those of you online, appreciate y'all being here for opening keynote. Please go ahead and get to the, if you're online virtually, attend the workshops and enjoy the rest of the symposium. And we'll see you back here for a lunchtime plenary. Vernice talked about, the next generation and young people and youth. We're going to have a session focused on young people in the EJ movement. So thank you.